Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. Today, I welcome Michael to the show, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So I'm just going to quickly introduce Michael, and then we're going to hear a little bit about his story. So Michael is a men's coach, researcher, and author working at the intersection of public health, gender, and racial justice. He helps men and boys unlearn toxic conditioning to build safe, equitable relationships with women and engages them as allies in ending gender-based violence. His work focuses on the socialization of masculinity as a public health issue with a research emphasis on domestic violence and anti-blackness. Welcome to the show today, Michael. Glad to have you on. So thanks for being here. Appreciate you. So yeah,
Yeah, for
Michael.
sure.
Absolutely. And I love the blue t-shirt as well. It's like my favorite color. So I'm glad you're wearing a blue t-shirt
Hey, thanks.
after black, which is my favorite color. Um,
Nice.
so yeah, like obviously I can tell you've got a few things you're like standing for, very passionate about.
Yeah.
Domestic violence we mentioned there, and around genders and all these different areas. So yeah, really just like to start off with maybe a few highlights from your story where this
Yeah,
passion comes from.
totally. Um, yeah, and just thanks again for having me, Johnny, and for the chance to talk about this with you. So really I had this turning point in my life where I was working at a domestic violence shelter, and I just kind of found myself there. It hadn't been a plan. Um, and I had a man whose family was staying at the shelter say to me, how do I stop hurting the people that I love? And for me, that was a part of a massive shift in my life where I began to just appreciate and realize just how much the problem of men's violence against women um, shaped my own upbringing, shaped so many people I know in our society that it's really pervasive in some ways that I had never thought about. And so I think that experience working at the shelter and beginning to work with abusive men who wanted to change, uh, again, it helped me to understand my own upbringing and the trauma in my family. And it also helped me to really sort of find my life's work and my mission in that.
Oh, okay. No, that's yeah. That so sort of. How did you get into working in the shelter? Was that kind of just
Yeah.
a random kind of act or that you saw?
Yeah. Yeah, it totally was. I had just finished a master's degree in Miami, Arizona, or Miami, Florida, sorry, getting my states mixed. And I decided to take a gap year, and I went out, I tagged along with a friend to Arizona before I was going to start my PhD the next year. And I thought I was going to be a bartender and just kind of mess around for a year. And I found that I had gotten too old for that
Mm.
type of work. I couldn't stay up late like that. Um, but I had always had a passion for working with children. It had always just, whenever I felt like my head was up my butt, working with kids helped me to get it straight. And so
Mm.
a friend of mine told me about this job opening at a domestic violence shelter facilitating a therapeutic art program for kids. And so I just took it thinking like, hey, I'm going to just enjoy being with kids and spend a year kind of doing some fun work, and then I'll get back to my higher education career. But again, it was like once I actually started showing up for my shifts at this shelter where men and fam or women and families, right, were making themselves homeless because they were trying to hide from a man in their life. Um, a really serious issue sort of caught my attention, and again, it just changed everything for me.
Mm. Mm. Ah, so that's amazing. So, with the guy who came up to you with
Yeah,
said he was like, how do I stop like hurting his family?
yeah, yeah.
Did you kind of speak to him often after then? Did you kind of uncover like maybe some of the reasons he felt he was doing? Because most, I'd imagine quite a lot of guys, I've never been in that
Yeah.
position of hurting someone, but I imagine quite a lot of people wouldn't admit that.
Yeah, it's true. It's really true. right? And I think as men, right, we often just don't open up to one another anyways,
Mm,
you know, about anything, especially if it can be more embarrassing, or scary, if it can bring up shame. And I think that's a part of the issue, right? So as men, we don't talk about these things. So this gentleman, he found out that I was participating in this pilot experimental men's program. And I had come into it because I was working at the shelter, and they decided they wanted to start this experimental men's program, which is premised on the idea of ending violence against women by getting men to take responsibility for the issue.
mm,
So I started in this program, and it was so intense, man. It was like combing through my entire life history with a fine-tooth comb and looking at my choices and how I had used power, privilege to try to get my way in my relationships, um, and really trying to transform men's consciousness. So I was in that, and I shared with this gentleman, like, hey, I'm in this program. You should come check it out. And so he joined it, and it's an intensive 6 month experience of just looking at, like, where are the roots of our abusive behavior, right? And for many of us, just to kind of like put a bow on it, for many of us, the roots of our abusive behavior is tied to the things we learned growing up as little boys about what it means to be a real man in our society. And so as we all, myself, this other gentleman, there was probably 10 or 15 guys in this group at a given time, as we begin to share, like, here's what I learned growing up, here's what I learned growing up, we actually realized that, while some men had been really abusive, some men much less so, we still shared a common experience
mm,
of inheriting these messages about manhood that didn't necessarily have a good impact on us or on our relationships.
mm. And abusive, by abusive, maybe physical, maybe emotional, all kinds of abuse, I guess, what you mean.
Exactly.
Because sometimes when you hear
Exactly.
abuse, it's like that's physical or maybe sexual, but it could be emotional,
Right.
I guess, as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think, like, honestly, it's not to minimize it, but, like, really abuse is like a tricky thing because I think abuse is the way that we try to take control
Mm,
in our relationships. And we all have an impulse for control. We all get scared. We all think we're right sometimes and the other person's wrong. And so I think, for me, it's about how we can get trained into a pattern always having to win, of always having to be right, of always having to have, like, that's where it begins to get into that line of, like, man, this isn't a mutual reciprocal relationship. I'm kind of dominating this person all the time, right? And so sometimes what I might call abuse might actually look like a pretty normal relationship. But if that other person doesn't have a lot of freedom and power in the relationship, I think that's when it's beginning to cross the line.
mm, mm. And you said the some guys were like the opposite, like, and they had that commonality. You're sort of talking about maybe the nice guy kind of people
Yeah.
pleaser syndrome side of it as well.
Yes.
They were in that group. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and that was what was really cool, right? Is, like, it's men from all walks of life, but just coming together to say, like, how do we bring a vision of manhood and masculinity in our community that promotes healing and love and connection and not disconnection? And so, yeah, there were guys in there who were on probation for domestic violence, but exactly, there were guys in there who were just, like, quote unquote good guys.
Mm,
People were there because they wanted to be, but also people who are, like, passive and people pleasing. Exactly right. But I think for all of us, the commonality is we had to look at how was I trained when it comes to, like, being a man, um, and how do I sometimes give myself permission, um, to not show up in my relationship in a vulnerable way, right? And to try to get my way or to not show up for the other person, right? I think, like, what we're looking at is the same, even if what we're finding there is different.
mm. How from your experience and the work you've done can we start showing up more vulnerably? Because I know it can be a terrifying thing for a lot of
Yes.
guys. I've definitely been there. All right, it can be a
Yeah.
terrifying thing. But was there anything you learned that can help guys be more vulnerable?
Yeah, great question. I really appreciate that. Because it is hard. First of all, I just want to acknowledge, I'm going to answer it, but most of us, we grew up in communities that like, man, we would get bullied, we would get picked on, we would get hurt like by others for being too vulnerable, for expressing or
Mm,
showing like our vulnerable side. Um, and we would get high-fived, rewarded, praised, promoted for showing like this false, tough exterior. Right. So I like to acknowledge for men, it's like there's a lot of pressure on us to not be vulnerable. Um, but I think, there's just two things I would say to keep it really simple that I usually am working on in my own life and with the men I work with. It's like step one, I have to be really emotionally present to my own self. Because if I don't know that I'm scared
mm,
and I don't know that you hurt my feelings yesterday, right? Because I'm just saying, well, I'm pissed. No, I'm not scared. No, you didn't hurt my feelings, right? If I'm in that defensive, disconnected from self place, like step one is I actually have to know, like, oh, I'm scared. Oh, I'm sad. I'm afraid. Um, but then I think step two, man, is just finding some small. It doesn't have to become everything. It doesn't even have to become every day if we're not ready for that. But some small opportunities every week with at least one person to give them a peek behind the curtain in a way that for me feels like a risk.
oh, I like
Like,
that.
right? Like, hey, I got to tell you, I've been feeling really sad lately, you know? And
Mm,
just, I think as we do a little bit of that, other people are going to cherish it so much that they're going to create that space more frequently. They're going to share vulnerably with us. And before we know it, we're going to have a life where vulnerability is a regular practice.
I love that. I love that. It's because you sometimes think of vulnerability like I would have used to think of it like this. I know we all think different, but it's sometimes we have the same thought. But like you think like our vulnerability is like I've got to tell everyone like or someone like all my life secrets and everything that's gone on. But
Yes.
I like
Yes.
what you're and seriously, some people I used to think like that, but it's just even that little bit you're sharing and things like that.
Yeah.
I'm at a place now where like I'll have like different moods. I might feel a bit sad, might feel a bit angry, and I will tell people I'll be like, okay, I feel really hurt because it didn't work out of her, or it didn't work.
Yeah.
I had a really tough time in that like business thing or whatever, or that career thing, and I'm pretty open, but like it takes time to get to that place,
It
right?
does.
And like your little shares like that, that's a really good one. I love that.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of courage. I'll just say real quick, one of my commitments, and I'm not always great at it, and I think that's okay too,
Mm,
got to get rid of the perfectionism if anything's going to have a chance. But I really love to try to at least once a week make sure that I said something vulnerable to my kids,
mm,
because that's a place where I can always show up as the knower, the doer, the guy with answers. Um, and maybe there's a place for that, but I think it's really healthy for them and for me if just like once a week I can just be like, yeah, I felt scared about this the other day, or I felt sad about this the other day. It's just like, just normalizing all that stuff. And I feel like that's a little bit of emotional hygiene for me. It helps me to be a bit of a healthier person when I can do that.
mm. I like that. Yeah, just for your kids. Do you, I don't know about you, and love to hear your view on this, Michael, but I've
Mhm.
found sometimes sharing vulnerably with the wrong person can actually be quite damaging. And it's, there are the right people though that I can trust and I feel safe with. So I don't know if you found
Yeah.
that because sometimes I know just for the listener there, if you're struggling with being
Yeah.
vulnerable, yeah, there may be a bad experience of vulnerability, but I've
Yeah.
had that, but I've certainly found people who I have been able to trust and feel safe with.
Yeah, for sure. And it is really important to acknowledge, like, yeah, man, not everybody is a safe person. And that's the bottom line. And I've definitely had experiences where I share something vulnerably. Um, and I am so surprised and disappointed by how
Mm,
the person I'm with responds. And for me, it's just like that's usually a big light bulb, like, okay, I thought I could like kind of count on you in this way, and I can't. But the second part you said to me is the most critical part. Like we don't want to stop there because I think it's really easy to get caught in the idea that like nobody cares, nobody's there.
Mm,
And that's, that's not a true story, but it can feel that way. And so I think if we can keep sensing into who is one safe person in my life where I could just take the littlest baby risk today, and then maybe next week us a little bigger, I really believe we will quickly find ourselves with people in our life that we can count on.
absolutely. Yeah, and I found, the people who didn't don't necessarily make you feel great. That's not their intention sometimes. It's just maybe
Right.
sometimes a lack of, working through their own stuff that they could perhaps not hold
Yes.
your space. And I remember like, certainly in like a vulnerable place, like dating relationships where lots of things can flare out of your own wounds and you're going through that and it's not worked out. I remember
Yes.
sharing with a couple of my female friends and one of them shared and then it was like, where do you think you went wrong with all of this? And that's just like, I'm just, I'm pretty like cool, like guys, like structure, all that. But I was right then, I needed my flow of feminine
Yeah.
energies to be heard and felt. And then I was
Yeah.
just like, I felt like dread whilst I was speaking to this friend. I was like, she's a good
Mhm.
person, but I don't feel like I can share with her again. And then I spoke to
Yeah.
someone else later, and she was just like, oh, really, thank you for showing me. I'm holding the space for you. I'm here for you. And I was
Mm.
just like, oh, I feel so much better. So that's just an example
Yes.
from my own life that I think has
I
really
love it.
helped me. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. And then in the men's group, it sounds like that's quite
Hmm.
beneficial for you and the other guys as well, for other guys to hold that space vulnerably.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I mean, like, I don't want to be so simplistic about the problems in our world today, Johnny, but I will say sometimes I feel like it's wild how many problems in my community get solved by men learning how to hold space to be vulnerable with one another as a regular discipline and practice.
Mm.
I just think for myself, I'll say, I spent a lot of time in self-destruction in my life. And when I was self-destructive, I was hurtful to other people. I was living in unconsciousness. I had a lot of pain. I had no roadmap for dealing with it. Um, but the moment that I learned to be in regular community with a group of other diverse men, and it didn't, it wasn't like didn't have to be structured, didn't have to be programmatic, but it was a space where we were going to tell the truth about the things that were hurting, the things that we wanted, the things we were afraid of. And when I was in that regular kind of space, the way that it helped me to quickly move through so many stuck places in my life. I'm really a big believer in that, with that when we can prioritize that in our communities, it's just like everybody in the community is healthier, safer, more in purpose, more blessed when we're doing that as men.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love that. Um, Michael, what would be your definition of masculinity? Because it's a term that's
Yeah.
thrown out there a lot, and I know there's some very varying views out there. And I always
Yeah.
look at some of them as curiosity, trying to say in
Yeah.
judgment, and some people have got different views. But yeah, I'd love to hear your view on
Yeah.
what it is for you.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, I would say I'll try to give you a couple of quick answers that together I think for an answer. I On the one hand, I always define masculinity as like, hey, this is just kind of like the ideas we have about men and what men do. And I don't think that's the most precise definition, but I think it's helpful for people to generally understand. When I talk about masculinity, I'm just saying like these are the assumptions we tend to have about what is for men and boys. Um, I think another way we can talk about that is like, masculinity and femininity are different types of energies, right? And we all kind of live on a spectrum where we have some of them, a lot of us are more concentrated on one end of the spectrum than the other. Um, but I think the last thing I'll say for me that's like a helpful reference point in this, because I got to say I have a PhD in this, so sometimes I can go way off the deep end and answering this question. So I'm trying to keep it accessible.
I love that.
Um, I heard somebody say once, and this is from a particular native culture that I'm blanking on right now, but the teaching was basically, like the greatness of a warrior is not a warrior who is hard and fierce all the time, but a great warrior is the warrior who can be fierce when fierceness is required
Mm,
and who can be soft when softness is required. And so for me, that's a helpful way that I like to think about like the masculinity I want to live with. I want to be fierce when that is exactly what the world around me needs, but I want to be soft and tender when that is exactly what the world around me needs. And I think where we get out of whack is there's a lot of people teaching today that yeah, man, being soft for men is destructive. And I think that's teaching people to live out of balance.
mm, mm, yeah. There's time, yeah, there's times I've noticed in my life where it's needing to do one and then the other, and it's just feeling into that for myself.
Yes,
Certainly, not it's not about one or the other, but
that's
yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah. I wanted to ask you as well, like, is there anything you do that you really helps you build that relationship with yourself? Because you were talking
Mm,
about, see, the men's group and then,
yeah.
connecting with ourselves and other guys. Is there something that, like, there's many different tools. I'm always fascinated to hear what
Yeah.
people like using to sort of connect
Yeah.
with themselves more.
Yeah. Awesome question. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so it's like, yeah, of course, in addition to like being in community and doing this work in community, because I will say it's like sitting in a room full of other brothers and hearing them disclose what they're carrying also helps to put a flashlight on what I'm carrying. Um, so I do, that's a part, but in terms of what I things that I personally do that I want to recommend and share, like under the big umbrella, and everybody says this, so it's not groundbreaking, but I'll say something more specific about it, is is meditation. So I start my day every day. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, with just 5, 10, 30, whatever minutes of breathing and being and feeling how I feel in my life with my attention, just feeling how I am feeling. I'm not thinking about my feelings. I'm not analyzing my feelings. I'm not, speculating or making plans about. I am feeling as much as I can how I feel to be alive for a little period of time. Um, and as a component of that, something I do and I always recommend is I do a weekly grief meditation where I just set aside about a half hour to feel pain, disappointment, hurt, that's come up. It might be old stuff, might be small, petty stuff from my week, but by giving myself a little bit of a practice to bring hygiene and attention to that pain, for me, that really helps me to stay, it keeps the pipes clean. I feel clear and like I'm not getting backed up with like resentments or hurt.
Not building up in the body, letting it like
Yeah,
cleanse. And I love that. I love
yeah,
releasing
yeah,
at the boat. Wow, not always in the process, but the after feelings certainly. Whether I'm screaming
yeah,
like that, screaming like a little boy on the floor when it,
yeah,
you know, that's not every day. That's that now and then when it's
yeah,
over the course of a few months, it's built up. But I love that the emotional
yeah,
hygiene you're talking about, Michael. No, that's awesome. The meditation's been a really useful one for you. Michael, I know you've got you do so much deeper into this work, and you've got a lot
yeah,
to offer with this.
yeah.
Really appreciate the work you're doing. I want to ask you: is there maybe a final point that you'd like to leave us with today? Maybe it's something we've talked about. Maybe it's another thing. And yeah, where can the listener find you if they want to reach you or find out more about the work you're doing?
Yeah, totally. No, I just appreciate the opportunity, Johnny, and the conversation and the question. So, um, you know, there's an old proverb I really love, which is that if the men of the tribe don't initiate the boys into the village, they'll burn down the village just to feel the warmth. And so for me, there is so much in this society that we can heal and get right as men, but just by coming into alignment and coming into vulnerable, authentic relationship with one another. So that's really it. Like that is my mission, bringing healing to our community, safety and justice for the women and children in our community when we end as men step into our authenticity and our power and live in vulnerable, interdependent relationships with one another. Um,
Mm.
There's I do a number of things to create opportunities for men to do that. Definitely would love to have people follow me on social media at Life Unbound Coaching. You can find TikTok, Instagram. I run a series called Men in the Wild, where every week we look at Reddit posts, relationship posts from around the internet, and sort of break down what men can do to bring healing, justice, connection into their lives. And I also want to say I run a free monthly men's talking circle, and that's just an online space where men can tap in with a group of brothers and do the very stuff that I've been talking to you about. So happy to share that information, and yeah, that's happening the last Tuesday of every month.
Oh, I love that. We'll be sure to make sure you're linked in the show notes below. So once again, Michael, massive thank you for coming on today.
Awesome. Thank you, Johnny. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. So that concludes our episode for today. And remember to lead with your heart and not with fear.